Right now, if you were to walk into a clinical psychiatric ward, you might assume, that most people are there because they're going through a temporary crisis.
Right. Like a rough phase.
Yeah, exactly. Like a severe depressive episode or maybe a sudden panic disorder, just something temporary. But the clinical data actually tells a completely different story.
It really does.
More than half of all psychiatric inpatients are not suffering from just a passing mood. They are hospitalized because of their actual personality.
Wow.
Yeah. Their fundamental everyday character traits have basically mutated into something so destructive that their lives have just, well, completely collapsed. So today, we are asking a pretty terrifying question, which is, at what point does a quirky personality trait cross the line and become a permanent pathological disorder?
It is a terrifying question.
Hmm.
And a really crucial one. We're looking at a fascinating mix of materials to answer it today. Specifically, the NOBA Discovering Psychology textbook chapter by Cristina Crego and Thomas Widiger, alongside some really illuminating lecture notes and presentation slides from a psychology professor, Dr. Riordon.
Right.
And our mission for this deep dive is to decode that surprisingly thin boundary between, just a normal individual quirk and severe psychological pathology.
Yeah.
Because for you, the listener, as someone just navigating group projects or the workplace or human relationships in general, understanding the mechanics behind this behavior is, it's essentially a survival tool.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we're going to diagnose a broken personality, we first have to figure out what a normal personality even is.
Exactly.
And the textbook brings up a really great quote from Gordon Allport to kind of set the stage here. He basically says personality isn't a finished product. It's more of a developing affair with some fixed features, but it's constantly changing.
Which is, it's a beautiful sentiment.
Yeah.
But modern dimensional psychology requires something you can actually measure.
Right, you need data.
Exactly. So scientists rely on the premier taxonomy for this, which is the five-factor model. You might have heard it referred to by the acronym OCEAN.
I love a good acronym.
It's a good one.
So let's look at this ocean model like a giant soundboard in a recording studio. You have these 5 main sliders that dictate the mix of who you are. You've got O for openness, so that's your intellectual curiosity, your willingness to try new things.
Right.
C is conscientiousness, which is your organization and discipline. E is extroversion, so your sociability, your energy. A is agreeableness, like how compassionate and cooperative you are. And then N is neuroticism, which is basically your baseline for emotional vulnerability and anxiety.
That soundboard analogy actually perfectly captures the core scientific consensus here. What the clinical research tells us is that a personality disorder isn't a foreign virus that invades the brain. It's not a medical disease you catch.
Wow.
It is literally just one of those normal, everyday sliders cranked all the way up to maximum until the speakers blow out.
So it's the volume knob just broken off at level 11.
Basically, yeah. And if we look at Dr. Riordan's slides, it's really fascinating to see how these extremes map out into specific disorders. Take obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, or OCPD.
Which people confuse all the time.
Oh, all the time. We throw the term OCD around so casually when someone, just likes a clean kitchen. But clinical OCPD is basically just that conscientiousness slider pushed to a dangerous, rigid extreme.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it degrades from being organized into this crippling perfectionism and workaholism where the person basically can't function.
Okay, so what happens when multiple sliders are messed up?
Well, it often does involve multiple sliders interacting. If we look at antisocial behavior, we see a really volatile combination. It's characterized by a mix of extremely high antagonism.
Which is what exactly?
That's just the agreeableness slider pulled all the way down to 0.
Oh.
So 0 agreeableness. And that is paired with exceptionally low conscientiousness. So you combine 0 compassion with 0 discipline, and the result is a callous, manipulative, and incredibly reckless profile.
Now, I do want to push back on something here, or at least, admit some confusion.
Yeah.
Because as I was looking at Dr. Riordan's slide, something just didn't add up for me.
Okay, what was it?
Let's look at avoidant personality disorder. The definition given is someone who has profound social inhibition and is hypersensitive to negative evaluation. They are terrified of being judged.
Right.
But the slide specifically categorizes this disorder as having high introversion and low neuroticism. Wait, if someone is that terrified of what people think of them, wouldn't they be highly neurotic and
Yeah, I
anxious?
would think so, yeah.
Right. So why is the neuroticism slider low?
That is a very sharp observation, actually, and it highlights a brilliant tension in the source notes. The slide does explicitly list low neuroticism for avoidant personality disorder, which feels super counterintuitive.
Yeah, totally.
But what makes this fascinating is how Dr. Riordon's slides contrast it with other disorders on that exact same page. For instance, schizotypal and borderline personality disorders are explicitly labeled as having high neuroticism.
So the professor's making a deliberate distinction there.
Precisely. While you might logically assume that a hypersensitivity to judgment equals high neuroticism, the clinical categorization here separates the specific, targeted social inhibition of the avoidant profile from the generalized, chaotic emotional instability.
The high neuroticism.
Exactly, the high neuroticism that defines something like borderline. So the avoidant person might actually be quite emotionally stable in isolation. Their intense fear is purely triggered by social evaluation. It's a very nuanced mapping of those sliders.
Wow, okay, that reframes it completely. It's a specific flavor of avoidance, not just a generalized emotional chaos. But here is the thing that really gets me about all of this. If someone's volume knob is jammed at level 11, and it's completely destroying their life, their relationships, their career, why don't they just go to a therapist and ask to get it fixed?
Because of a psychological blind spot that makes these disorders incredibly difficult to treat.
Yeah.
In the clinical world, these traits are classified as egosyntonic.
Egosyntonic, meaning in sync with their ego.
Essentially, yes. The maladaptive patterns are so deeply woven into the person's core sense of identity that they literally cannot perceive them as a problem.
No way.
Yeah, to them, their destructive behavior feels completely normal, justified, and correct. They entirely lack personal insight. So when a relationship blows up or they get fired from a job, they never look inward. They automatically blame outside circumstances or the flaws of other people. Their ego protects itself by projecting the blame outward.
So they literally cannot hear that their own music is too loud. To them, the rest of the world is just playing the wrong tune.
That is a great way to put it.
Dr. Riordon's notes include this amazing Appendix A with these little profiles of hypothetical party guests that makes this egosyntonic trap so incredibly concrete.
Oh, the party scenarios are fantastic.
Let's imagine you and I are at this party. First, we run into Winston.
Ah, Winston. The textbook example of narcissistic personality disorder.
Oh man, we've all been trapped in a corner at a party by a Winston. You're just trying to eat your cheese cube. And he spends 40 minutes bragging about his new Mercedes, his trip to Europe, and his favorite French restaurants. Everyone is visibly exhausted by him, but he just keeps talking. Then he makes a highly critical, mean-spirited remark about a woman's dress. He hurts her feelings. But because he is egosyntonic, he absolutely cannot apologize. He tries to talk his way around it and eventually blames her for being too sensitive and getting upset.
It's always someone else's fault. And if we connect Winston's behavior to the broader scientific literature, it perfectly illustrates a 2021 study by Giervik and Bushman on the link between narcissism and aggression, which is cited in our sources.
Okay, what did they find?
They looked at the actual mechanics of why narcissists lash out. They found that extreme elevations in these traits, specifically high entitlement and superiority, which represent the extreme antagonistic pole of low agreeableness, directly trigger real-world aggression.
How does that mechanism actually work, though? Is it because their ego is secretly super fragile?
That is exactly the mechanism. Underneath all the bragging, the narcissistic core is incredibly fragile and constantly needs external validation. When that fragile ego is threatened by even a minor social slight.
Like someone looking bored while they talk about their Mercedes.
Right, or a woman reacting poorly to their insult. That creates a massive internal crisis. So to protect the ego, they displace that internal shame into intense aggression against innocent bystanders. The textbook manual notes how this plays out in modern settings like college campuses.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, you pack students into cramped dorms and crowded lecture halls, and someone with Winston's traits might turn a classroom into a hostile environment just because their ego was bruised by a professor's mild critique.
So Winston's issue is an inflated, fragile ego lashing out. But what happens when the conscientiousness slider is the one that breaks? Let's look at another guest at this party, Peter.
Oh, Peter.
Yeah. Peter has obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. He arrives at the party exactly on time, He speaks to every single guest for exactly 5 minutes, timing it perfectly. He only talks about technology and finance, actively avoids any conversation about feelings or personal lives, and then he leaves precisely at 10 p.m. because he has to go home and organize his work for the next day.
It's total rigid control. He is completely sacrificing flexibility, spontaneity, and genuine human connection just to maintain a sense of orderliness.
Wow.
And again, to Peter, this isn't a problem. He doesn't see himself as robotic. He probably thinks everyone else at the party is lazy, disorganized, and just wasting their lives. The rigidity feels correct to him.
Then there's William. William wanders into the party, but he isn't bragging and he isn't checking his watch. Instead, he feels the negative forces in the room are unsettling to his psychic soul spot. He's aloof, highly anxious, and the people he does talk to feel really uneasy around him, eventually just calling him a space cadet and walking away.
William is demonstrating schizotypal personality disorder. This is characterized by severe social discomfort, paired with eccentric, unconventional ideas and perceptual distortions.
Let's clarify that term real quick. Perceptual
Yes.
distortions. Is that like a hallucination?
Not quite a full hallucination, which is why it's a personality disorder and not schizophrenia. A perceptual distortion means their brain misinterprets sensory information.
Oh.
So they might see a shadow in the corner of the room and genuinely feel a malevolent psychic presence watching them. Or they might believe they can read the auras of the other party guests. This makes social interaction terrifying and confusing for them, so they withdraw.
It's so helpful to see these mapped out as real people at a party. But given that human behavior can go off the rails in so many different ways, how does modern psychology actually organize the chaos? Do we just have hundreds of these diagnoses?
We used to have a lot more, actually. But during the development of the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Psychology Experts, proposed retaining only the 6 personality disorders that had the absolute strongest empirical support.
I see.
They stripped away the theoretical ones and kept the deeply researched ones. They call them the Big Six.
So the big 6 are borderline, antisocial, schizotypal, avoidant, narcissistic, and obsessive-compulsive.
That's the list. Each of these represents a validated, highly predictable constellation of traits. And understanding these 6 is vital for large institutions. A 2022 clinical analysis by Russell and Rushensky, which is mentioned in our texts, looked at how tracking these specific 6 disorders helps university administrations identify safety risks.
Wait, so you're saying university admins are using these 6 specific profiles as a literal threat detection system?
They have to. For instance, a student exhibiting the callous disregard of antisocial personality disorder, or the intense, volatile anger of borderline, requires a targeted, specialized intervention. By focusing their resources on these 6 empirically validated diagnoses, campuses can spot the behavioral patterns early and intervene before interpersonal instability escalates into a severe safety crisis or, violence.
I want to pause here and challenge something because as I was cross-referencing our materials, I found a pretty glaring contradiction.
Oh.
Yeah. When it comes to where these disorders actually come from their etiology, Dr. Riordon's slides explicitly state on the validity slide, little is known about etiology. It basically says it's a mystery.
Right.
But then I open the NOBA textbook manual, and it spends pages breaking down the exact genetic and environmental origins of antisocial and borderline disorders. So which is it? Is it a mystery, or do we know the origins?
That is a great catch, and it really shows how fast the field is moving. Dr. Riordon's slide represents an older, more cautious clinical view from when the data was still pretty murky. But the textbook manual gives us the most current synthesized view, which is called the biosocial model. We actually know quite a bit now, largely thanks to landmark empirical studies like the massive 2006 cross-cultural twin data published by Yamagata and colleagues.
Oh, I've heard of these. Think about how a twin study actually operates. This is where they find identical twins who share 100% of their DNA, but were separated at birth and raised in completely different environments, right?
Exactly. And Yamagata's data showed that even when raised in entirely different cultures, identical twins displayed remarkably similar levels on those ocean personality sliders.
That is wild.
It is. This proved that human personality structure is universally hardwired into our biology. So, to reconcile your contradiction, it's not that we know nothing about etiology anymore. It's that we now know it's an incredibly complex, high-stakes interaction between those hardwired genetic vulnerabilities and harsh environmental conditions.
So it's nature and nurture, but instead of cooperating, they are violently colliding.
Violently is the right word. Take antisocial personality disorder. The biological component is an inherited genetic predisposition toward low anxiety, fearlessness, and high aggressiveness.
Okay.
But having that genetic profile alone doesn't automatically create a manipulative, antisocial adult. The pathology develops when that specific biology interacts with an unstable environment like inconsistent parenting, severe neglect, or physical abuse. That combination of fearlessness and abuse prevents the child from ever developing normal empathy or a moral compass.
What about borderline personality disorder? How does the biosocial model explain that one?
Borderline arises from a child inheriting a severe genetic vulnerability to emotional instability. The clinical term is intense negative affectivity.
Meaning they just feel sadness, anger, and rejection way more intensely and for much longer than the average person.
Exactly. Their emotional baseline is just hypersensitive. But again, that alone isn't borderline. The trigger is what psychologists call a highly invalidating home environment.
An invalidating environment. What does that actually look like in practice? Is it just strict parenting?
It's far more damaging than strictness. It's an environment where a child's intense emotional outbursts are consistently punished, ignored, or mocked by the caregivers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The child is essentially taught that their internal experiences are inherently wrong or manipulative because they are never taught how to soothe their intense feelings and are instead punished for having them. They never learn healthy emotional regulation. That biological sensitivity combined with that environmental invalidation creates the chronic emptiness, chaotic relationships, and self-harming behaviors we see in adults with borderline.
So it's a double whammy. It's not just that they feel things intensely, it's that the very people who are supposed to teach them how to handle those feelings actively punish them for having them.
Exactly.
Then the textbook manual connects this directly to the American Psychological Association's Stress in America 2025 report. That report details how severe environmental stress and childhood trauma accelerate these chronic disorders. It paints a picture that really changed my perspective.
Oh.
Well, when you see a college student have an absolute disproportionate meltdown over a group project, it's rarely about their intellect or work ethic. It is very often a delayed expression of that childhood trauma interacting with their genetic traits under the immense pressure of the academic environment.
Which is exactly why this knowledge is a survival tool. It reframes how you view difficult, erratic behavior in the workplace or the classroom. You start to see that underlying relational deficits and broken coping mechanisms are driving the failure, not just a bad attitude.
But that leads us to a pretty bleak realization, doesn't it? If these disorders are hardwired biologically, locked in place by childhood trauma, and egosyntonic, meaning the person's own ego, prevents them from even seeing the problem, is there any hope for treatment?
For a long time, the clinical consensus was very pessimistic. There was a false assumption that personality disorders simply could not be treated. But there is a crucial exception to the egosyntonic rule.
Borderline personality disorder.
Yes. Because people with borderline experience such immense, overwhelming emotional pain, their ego can't fully protect them from the fallout. They realize they are suffering, and therefore they actually are motivated to seek help.
We didn't talk about Sherry from Dr. Riordon's party scenario earlier, but she fits this borderline profile perfectly.
He really does.
She showed up to the party already drunk, flirted wildly, expressed deep affection to complete strangers, disappeared with different men, had a violent screaming match over a spilled drink, and then locked herself in a bathroom and attempted to swallow a bottle of aspirin. And afterwards, she was terrified to be alone. That isn't just quirky behavior. That is profound, excruciating pain.
And for decades, therapists honestly didn't know what to do with that level of pain and chaos. Standard talk therapy often made it worse.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it would just trigger their feelings of invalidation. Enter Dr. Marsha Linehan.
Dr. Marsha Linehan developed dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. And what I find so brilliant about this is the core philosophy. She took traditional cognitive behavioral science, which is all about changing your thoughts, and blended it with principles of Zen Buddhism, which is all about accepting the present moment.
That's a fascinating combination.
Yeah, DBT is built on this tension, a dialectic between radically accepting the patient exactly as they are, while simultaneously pushing them to change their destructive behaviors. The textbook includes a quote from Carl Rogers that captures this vibe perfectly. He said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change."
It is a brilliant paradox, and it is the engine that drives DBT. A standard DBT program is incredibly rigorous. It lasts a full year.
Whole year?
A whole year. It involves weekly individual psychotherapy, intensive group skills training, 24/7 phone coaching for crises, and even a consultation team for the therapists themselves, because treating these disorders is exhausting, high burnout work.
And they are teaching very specific mechanical skills, right? They aren't just sitting on a couch talking about their childhood for a year.
Highly specific. Patients systematically acquire 4 essential life skills: mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. And alongside DBT, clinicians often incorporate mentalization-based therapy, or MBT.
Let's break down mentalization. How does a patient actually learn to do that?
Mentalization is the ability to understand your own mental state and correctly interpret the intentions of others. A patient learns to pause and ask, is my brain lying to me right now?
Okay.
If a friend doesn't text back for an hour, a borderline patient's brain might scream, they hate me, they are abandoning me. MBT exercises train the patient to stop, observe that thought, and evaluate alternative realities. Like maybe they're just driving or in a meeting. It literally trains the brain to stop the paranoia spiral, which stabilizes their relationships.
And the distress tolerance skills they learn in DBT are physical too, right? Things like splashing freezing cold water on their face to shock their mammalian dive reflex and force their heart rate to slow down when they want to self-harm.
Yes, very physical, concrete skills.
What's amazing is that this intensely clinical toolkit isn't just locked away in psychiatric hospitals anymore.
No, and that's the most exciting development. A 2025 CE Corner publication evaluated the real-world application of adapted DBT skills groups on modern college campuses.
Right, because campuses are high-stress environments dealing with all sorts of relational conflict and anxiety.
Exactly. The publication specifically highlighted non-traditional learners. Imagine someone managing a full-time job, taking rigorous classes, and raising kids. The pressure is immense.
Oh, absolutely.
When counseling centers run these brief, adapted DBT groups, it is literally saving academic careers. When these students are taught structured distress tolerance and emotion regulation skills, they can manage massive anxiety spikes without turning to self-destructive habits or dropping out.
It's practical survival. Which brings us to a quote from Marsha Linehan herself that the textbook highlights. She says, "We are not trapped or locked up in these bones. No, no, we are free to change." It's such a powerful reminder that these disorders, as destructive and terrifying as they can be, are just extreme variations of the human experience. They aren't moral failures.
They are tragic variations, yes. And understanding that changes everything about how you approach someone who is struggling. Abraham Maslow is quoted in the notes saying, "What's necessary to change a person is to change his awareness of himself." That is the fundamental goal of everything we've discussed today, helping people build the awareness to turn down their own destructive volume knobs.
Which leaves me with a thought I really want you to chew on as we wrap up. We've established from the 5-factor model that personality disorders are extreme exaggerations of normal traits. And we know from the EPA 2025 report that environmental stress accelerates chronic emotional dysregulation. We also know that borderline traits are triggered by an invalidating environment in childhood.
Right, where their internal reality was constantly denied.
So look at the macro environment of the modern world. Look at hyper-competitive colleges, the relentless 24/7 pressure of corporate workplaces, the severe isolation of our digital culture. Are these modern high-stress environments actually acting as a societal invalidating environment?
That's a heavy question.
Right. Are they creating personality pathology on a mass scale? Because if our modern society is inherently invalidating, maybe DBT distress tolerance skills shouldn't just be reserved for clinical patients. Maybe learning how to mentally pause, regulate extreme emotions, and tolerate distress should be a mandatory prerequisite for navigating modern life.
It's a very compelling argument. If the environment is universally invalidating, the coping skills need to be universal too.
So what does this all mean for you? It means the next time you encounter someone whose quirks seem aggressive, erratic, or just impossible to deal with, remember the soundboard. Ask yourself which slider is jammed. And more importantly, ask yourself where your own sliders are sitting today. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll catch you next time.